Hello, uh, Alex here again for Chapter 5 of Cost Accounting 203. And so, once again, the book's really hard to read and understand, and it just gets harder and harder in cost accounting. The easiest way to learn cost accounting is just to do the problems. Just work the problems and just pretty much memorize what to do with the numbers. But I can discuss the chapter a little bit. It's Process Cost Accounting General Procedures, Chapter 5. Basically, when you have items you're making on an assembly line, you're going to have different parts of the assembly process. So like here, the beginning example is they are making, well, I'll just read it. The Wrigley Cola Incorporated manufactures 2-liter bottles of a carbonated beverage in a continuous production manufacturing process, so they continually make them. Wrigley's only in-house financial person is Earl Banks, a bookkeeper with limited formal accounting education, which sometimes that happens. Sometimes you get accountants that have never taken any courses, they've never been educated in it. They just learn as they go. To determine the unit cost per bottle for inventory costing purposes, Bank adds all the materials, labor, and overhead costs for the period, and then divides that total by the number of filled and unfilled bottles produced. Billy Jean Williams, funny name, Vice President Marketing, uses the unit cost figures to determine a selling price, and based on her perceptions, the cost figures are lower than would be expected, even with the current efficient manufacturing operations. So she's actually seeing that the cost's lower than what it should be, which means the accountant's not actually doing the right cost accounting on this situation. Why might the unit cost figures actually be higher than Bank's calculations? The answer lies in the computation of the number of bottles of cola manufactured. The unfilled bottles should not be given the same weight as the finished bottles in computing the number of units of production. This chapter, this is basically the whole thing of this chapter, is this chapter introduces the concept of equivalent units of production, an understanding of which would enable banks to obtain a more accurate unit cost per bottle. The ethics mini case at the end of this chapter indicates how an incorrect computation of equivalent units of production can affect the employee compensation. So basically, you have stuff that you're making. Let's say you have candy, and you make chocolate-covered cherries. So you start with the cherries, and the first part of the conveyor belt takes the cherry and shells it out, takes the seed out. The next part maybe glazes it with the cherry flavored, it sweetens it, it makes it a sweet cherry, gives it some syrup, puts some sugar on it, processes it to make it a nice sweet cherry, and then the last procedure covers it with chocolate. Well, every step of that way adds new costs. The first cost is taking the seeds out, paying the people to take those seeds out. The next part is putting the sweeteners on it to make it sweet. Costs money. The next part is putting the chocolate on it. You got to pay for that too. And so that's the process costing, is every step along the way you're adding to the cost. So instead of just assuming the cost is one stage and just lumping them all together, you have to cost them out separately because they're all different. One might cost more than the other, and you want to keep them in the right spots. And eventually you'll keep adding costs as you go, to where instead of just thinking, oh, well, if I lump them all together and divide by the units I've made, I'll get this. Instead, keep track of how much you're costing per stage, and you'll keep adding to the units to find out what the actual cost is, because it's not just a simple equation. So basically, the easiest way I can do this, it's going to help you a lot more once I do an example. But I'll just explain some of the big terms. Job order cost system is appropriate when differentiated products or services are provided on a special order basis, basically made to order. Boat makers, car makers, just make it to order. And a process cost system is used when goods or services of a similar nature provided when it's basically major manufacturing, making the Tootsie Rolls or the soda pops. But the focus of the process cost system is the cost center to which costs are assigned. So that's how you assign costs based on department or on the procedure. Examples are Levi's have assembly lines, Coca-Cola has assembly lines, General Mills Food has assembly lines, ExxonMobil Petroleum has assembly lines, and pharmaceuticals, Merck & Company, have assembly lines. So basically, that wasn't a good. So the stages of completion. So that's one thing you'll have to keep track of is you'll have, like, let's say you have 17,000 units finished, but you still have 2,000 units at the end, one half completed. Your equivalent units of production is 18,000. So you got to keep track of what have you made versus what's still in process, and then find out of the ones that are made, how many are 100% completed, and then what have you just transferred in. Without having to confuse you. And the book gives you a lot of information. But there's problems. Once again, the recall and review are basically the best way to start handling these chapters from now on, because they can get really convoluted, so it can get really complicated. But so yeah, you got to figure out what are the equivalent units of production based on what's been made and what hasn't been made, and that's the most important, because you're not going to assign cost to units you haven't made. So the units you have made are going to take more of the cost. See how that's why the manager was saying how the costs were low? It's because the accountant was just taking everything together, dividing it by all the bottles made, and then finding out what was the cost. That would give you a lower cost per bottle, because you should only be dividing all the cost by what's completely finished, not what is actually still in process. And that's where you'd have more cost, because then you'd have more cost per bottle. So it actually makes a little more sense now that. So yeah, don't be afraid of this chapter though. So for example, in a process cost system, detailed labor time records for an employee who only works in one department are not needed, because the cost object, the item you want to know the cost of, is the individual department where the employee works. So you're just going to take the whole department that he works and find out the cost for that. Not just the employee, what he's been doing, just that what he's working on. Because he could be working different jobs, but you just want that one job that pertains to that one product. Stage of completion represents the fraction or percentage of materials, labor, and overhead costs of a completed unit that has been applied to goods that have not been completed by the end of the month. So if they haven't been completed by the end of the month, you're not going to include them in the cost of the equivalent units. The cost of production summary is that presents the necessary information for inventory valuation and serves as a source for summary journal entries that are posted to the work in process account for each department and to the finished goods account. So that's basically saying you'll close out all your accounts to the work in process. So factory overhead, work in process, materials, work in process, payroll, work in process, and then you'll turn the work in process into the finished goods. But only until they're done. They have to be finished. Everything has to be complete on the unit to be able to be moved to finished goods. Yeah. So that was the biggest thing. Not a whole lot other than that, besides just a lot of examples in the book that sometimes can be complicated. But the easiest way to go about it is I'll just probably do a video tomorrow on an example, and I can probably maybe do a few if they're just the exercises. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment. And uh, thank you for tuning in, and I shall be back with the chapter 5 examples. And thank you very much. It's funny as I just came from business law, so I'm just kind of working this one in real quick. But I hope it helps. Thank you very much.